all. I'm Naveen Kumar. I head solutions and customer success at Contify. Also with me is Chirag Bansal, who heads sales at Contify, and Shilpa Tandon, who heads marketing here. For our audience, we are speaking today with Brendan Liverman from the Silicon Valley Bank. SVB uses Contify for tracking market and competitive intelligence. First of all, thanks for joining us today, Brendan. Highly appreciate you taking out time amidst your busy schedule. Well, all of us are aware that yours is a high-tech commercial bank that has helped fund over 30,000 startups, all ranging from technology to healthcare. Would you like to take out 2 minutes to talk about your company and explain your role in SVB, please?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So SVB is, as you already mentioned, a commercial bank that's focused on what we call the innovation economy. So venture-backed and private equity-backed tech and healthcare companies. Mm-hmm. We're not just based in Silicon Valley. We started in the Valley because of close relationships with venture capital, but we've expanded to a number of locations across the U.S. and also have a number of international locations in Europe, in Asia as well, and also in Israel. So I would say that, the way to think about us is as, any other commercial bank. We don't really have retail operations, but with the exception that, we have that very narrow niche focus on the industries that we feel like we know well and can serve in a differentiated way, which would be those high growth tech and healthcare companies.
Got it. And then I'm sure you play a diverse role in the company. Would you want to touch upon that as well,
Sure.
Brendan?
Yeah, happy to. So I basically lead one half of our corporate strategy team. The part that I lead really functions as kind of an internal consulting function is the easiest way to think about us. Mm-hmm. And that was also my experience prior to SVB. So I've been with the bank for about 2 years now. Prior to that, I was in the financial services practice at McKinsey out of the San Francisco office. Mm-hmm. And basically the team that I've built at SVB is trying to tackle the same types of predominantly growth strategy questions that we would have traditionally hired an outside firm for. So product launches, geographic expansion, customer segmentation and go-to-market redesign, all of those kinds of classic growth and operational effectiveness questions. A lot of those end up falling to my team. And our scope is relatively broad. So we kind of operate across the full SVB platform. We're not aligned to any particular business unit. So we have coverage, internationally. We have coverage for all of our product areas, for our private bank, investment banking, SVB Capital. So it's a fairly diverse scope for a relatively lean team. I've got 5 people that work for me currently, and we're growing quickly, but we're still a relatively small pilot for what I think a corporate strategy function at a bank like SVB could be.
That's so interesting to know that you and your team add so much value to the organization broadly. I'm sure to the banking sector itself in so many ways. Knowing your roots today. In fact, I got to know you in much more detail today with this introduction, Brendan. Thanks for that. I remember the pre-pandemic era when your team approached Contify. Now I'm going back in time to understand. What were the key challenges you were facing that made you look out for a market intelligence and competitive intelligence solution?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I already mentioned before the kind of the different elements, the dimensions of scope at SVB. So we've got, multiple geographies, we've got multiple industries, even with our niche focus. And we've got multiple product lines, right, and business units that span a number of different areas of banking, most of the areas of banking aside from kind of traditional, mass market consumer retail banking operations. And so one of the challenges that we face having a relatively lean team, as I was just describing, is it can be pretty difficult to stay on top of all of the developments in the banking industry broadly that are relevant to us, because it's not just, U.S. banking news and competitor set. It's also international, and even within the U.S., right? It's not just 1 or 2 head-to-head direct competitors. Because of the niche that we play in, we sort of compete with a really broad range of other financial institutions. At the top end, some of the largest banks in the world, JP Morgan Chase has a lot of activity in the venture-backed industries that we focus on. all the way down to, much smaller fintechs that are offering these, point solutions that are attacking specific product categories in our portfolio. So, whether it's Brex trying to target their credit card offerings towards the same venture-backed companies that we're focused on, or alternative lenders like, Clearbank or Pipe and others that are trying to sort of take the lending part of our operations and remove it from the context of a full service bank. And so keeping track of that really broad range of different types of financial services companies, different geographies is difficult. And I think especially at our scale, we probably would have needed somebody full time to monitor those types of developments. And we don't really have the scope to do that because we're trying to keep our team, much more productively deployed across all of the project work that we have coming up on a day-to-day basis. So we were looking for some more leverage basically, and weren't sure exactly what form that was going to take, but kind of a mix of either getting a more junior analyst type of a resource up to evaluating a couple of software-driven solutions like yourself.
Totally understand that point, Brendan, and thanks for bringing that out. I'm sure a lot of value are basically product and the analysts are able to bring on board. And great that you're leveraging it in the right way, where you're able to keep your team lean and strong, and then parallelly we have our product supporting you in this endeavor across these segments that you mentioned and across the geographies. So happy to hear this. Great. And I do remember the first call we had wherein we discussed your requirements in detail, Brendan, and exciting times those were. Hope the world is back to normal soon. So just coming on to the next point. So before your team signed up for Contify, it'll be interesting for us to know, how was market intelligence handled in your organization?
Yeah. So not particularly well, to be honest with you, and that's where we'd identified it as a gap, as a capability that we wanted to build. And I would say there are kind of two things going on. One is that we didn't really have anybody at the bank who was dedicated to covering competitive intelligence and market developments. And so there were a lot of different people that were kind of doing it off the side of their desk in a very fragmented and incomplete way. Myself and my team were one of those groups that was doing that. There was also our client experience team. There were our sort of in-market teams, the actual relationship managers and sales force of the bank. There were sales operations. There were really a lot of different kind of corners of the bank that were trying to look at the parts of our competitive set that they thought were most relevant to them. And then we were never really kind of aggregating that together in one picture. So occasionally people would see something interesting and, you would get an email link shared around, and we'd start a little bit of a dialogue among people in different functions who needed to be aware of those developments. But we really did not have any sort of a formalized function or process for managing that. And as a result, I think we kind of, underserved that function. So, when we would start a new strategy project in a new geography or a new product area or whatever it was, the scope of that project, one of the first things we would have to do is try to do that kind of de novo research and get up to speed on the market and on our competitor set that was relevant to the scope of that particular project, because we didn't really have any base of information we could draw on. We were kind of recreating that every time we would do a new project to reestablish that baseline of what the competitive environment looked like. And so I think that created a lot of challenges because that was our challenge in our use case, but there were other use cases for competitive intelligence, like informing executive level discussions around strategy or informing our product team's design and development process. And so I think there just wasn't a great mechanism, honestly, for us internally to feel like we were covering that information without doing it sort of bespoke for every question that came up.
Absolutely. Same is the finding that we've had in the last decade-long experience with the product, Brendan. Basically, our clients report scattered sort of intelligence reporting internally, and then the moment they have a bespoke, structured, configured portal to sort of manage all of this, it really has helped them a lot. So yeah, great. So I'm aware you receive a quarterly trends report, Brendan, that pinpoints latest trends such as funding activities of the competitors, their expansion plans, some new product offerings that they are coming out with. So so how do you think Contify is an apt solution to identify and to capitalize these trends?
Yeah, so we have a couple of different deliverables that we get from Contify, and I think they all sort of play different roles as part of our competitive intelligence process. You mentioned the quarterly trend reports, and I think that the most helpful thing there is that it gives us that kind of synthesis and summary. It's not a comprehensive list. It's sort of trying to distill what the most important developments over the last 3 months were. And, in some periods, given the kind of diverse competitive set that we were talking about before, there can be a lot of noise, right? I mean, there's there's fundraising announcements. A lot of our competitors are venture backed. They're constantly making changes in their product set. They're announcing new partnerships. They're doing acquisitions. They're expanding their geographic scope. And so it can be hard sometimes, I think, to kind of triage all of that information and find the things that really are most relevant because they're either the most significant developments or because they're related to other things that are happening in the industry and they're either the beginning or the continuation of some type of a trend. And that's what I think is really helpful about the quarterly reports is that we always take that lens to it. It's not just here's the top 10 stories from the last 3 months, but they're sort of organized along with stories about other people in our competitive set to try to find where the commonality is. And it just makes it easier for us to have conversations internally around what's happening in the industry. So yeah, that particular fintech competitor had a really large round. Is that part of a trend or is that sort of anomalous or specific to that name? There's been some geographic expansion announcements with some of the European Novo banks. Do any of the is that sort of a one-off? Is it one or two of them they're going to move into our space? Is that going to be a broader trend where a lot of them are going to try to open US-based commercial banking operations? I think finding those connections between the stories is something that is a lot easier to do on a more periodic basis, like the quarterly reports.
Absolutely makes sense. I can clearly relate to what you're saying, Brendan. Basically, identifying a trend that's sort of emerging that can be something like SPACs or maybe private capital exchanges to something as generic as we can think of. But the good part is in this quarterly synthesis that the trends are at times pretty much eye openers also when we visualize these events that happen in the quarter basically and present it in a synthesized format. So that makes all the sense. Yes. On top of the quarterly trends report, I'm aware that you receive weekly newsletters also, and would love to understand how these weekly updates are now consumed by your team internally. And then what I would like to understand mainly is I know these are directly shared with the end consumers, but
Yes.
but how does it actually help trigger any discussion or any strategic decision on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. Yeah. So the weekly summaries I think are helpful because they sort of make us sure that we're not missing anything during the week. And again, given kind of how dynamic the competitive set where we operate is, there aren't a lot of weeks that are light news weeks. It happens every once in a while. There's only one or two developments, but usually there's quite a lot for us to stay on top of. And I think that weekly synthesis is sort of the right level to make sure that at least among sort of the core users of competitive intelligence, so corporate strategy, corporate development, the executive team, leaders in our product organization, they're much closer to that information, and that cadence sort of works for them in terms of being able to fully absorb everything that they think is relevant in our markets. And I think in terms of how it ends up getting used, it's a couple of things. The most common use case is that people will sort of find something in one of those weekly reports that they find interesting, and then we'll start a dialogue on that. So you'll see the newsletters getting forwarded around, internally within our executive group, or people will know that we sort of played a hand in helping to design and curate those reports. So they'll, loop strategy back in on the thread, and they'll ask for our reaction or commentary. And that's great because, that's not the type of thing that we really have the bandwidth to do proactively on every single story. We're not going to add that kind of, value added commentary, as part of our standard process. But when somebody flags something as being interesting or relevant to their business, it's very easy for them to then, create a thread on that and get a dialogue going. And that could be as simple as kind of just having an exchange back and forth over email with the executive sponsor who picked up on that. It could be sort of an excuse to have a call and have a deeper strategic conversation about a topic that may or may not have already been on our radar as a strategy team. Or occasionally it's even sort of the genesis of a whole project. So this is a development that we need to watch. Let's evaluate whether, SVB can or should be responding in some particular way to that announcement, and everything in between. So I think really the main value of those weekly use cases is as a catalyst for us to sort of work with different functional stakeholders and business leaders across the bank.
That's great to know. This is the first time I got that depth of how the information flows internally, run, and it's super exciting for our team to know as well that this is how it's being leveraged, what we deliver on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, kind of a thing. For your team, I know we are monitoring numerous segments, and that ranges from large enterprises, large diversified banks to some niche challenger banks. In your engagement with Contify, and I'm not sure if you got a chance, but wondering if there were any surprises, any pleasant surprises while monitoring these broad segments.
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that I know it was kind of part of our initial discussions when we were evaluating Contify, but I don't think I fully appreciated until we started working together, is how customizable the whole engagement is, and not just in terms of being able to kind of pick different lists of companies that we monitor or group them together. That kind of surface level customization, I think, was helpful when we were getting started and feeling like we could organize the information that we were collecting on the platform. But I think the much more important type of customization that I've really appreciated about working with you guys is that you're just very responsive to either changes in prioritization. So if there's a theme that we really care about, or a certain type of development or a competitor that we're really watching, it doesn't have to be sort of like a binary flag in a database. We can have a conversation about that. And I sort of see the results getting passed through to the analysts that are helping kind of curate our information flow and generate these reports, that it feels like people are being responsive to our needs and our context in a more granular way. And another example of that customization, we talked about the quarterly reports earlier. And one of the things that's been really helpful for us is that we've actually kind of hybridized the format of those reports. So there's the section that your analysts take the lead on, which is curating all of the news results and finding sort of the thematic groupings for some of those developments. And then we've layered another section on top of that same report where we report back on a regular basis about some of the metrics that we track related to competition. So we talk about market share, product penetration, NPS, and other sort of higher level quantitative signals for competitive intensity. And we generate those reports internally because we hold all of that data. But then when we share that with you and you're able to kind of combine it with the qualitative information from your market research, it makes a really cohesive and effective deliverable together. And I think that, being able to kind of piggyback on that distribution and also present the insights side by side is helpful in terms of expanding the reach of insights that my team is able to share across the bank. Because now everybody who gets those newsletters is also getting at least a little bit of that, value added analysis and, quantitative analysis that's relevant to that same theme around competition and market development. So That's been really great. It's just sort of working together to refine those deliverables, month after month or quarter after quarter, and get them to a place where they really feel like they're closely tailored to our use case.
I'm sure, Brendan, the feeling is mutual there, that there was a point in time when our team reported actually that they felt like being part of your team, working as closely, basically helping customize those newsletters. So the pleasure is all ours on that front. Just moving on, most of our users mention, I know we touched upon this already, but most of our users mention time saving, efficient resource utilization as some of the key impacts or key result areas that they experienced, they witnessed while using Contify. Any more impact, any more result areas, key result areas that you think the whole engagement generated within SVB?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I don't know how quantified I'll be with the KPIs, but when I think sort of more generally about the impact of the relationship, in addition to kind of the resource savings and efficiency we already talked about, right? Not needing to hire a dedicated analyst to cover this area. There's also a number of other benefits to the rest of our practice. Number one, I would say, I mentioned kind of our operating model before working with Contify was that we would have a pretty intensive period at the beginning of every project where we'd have to kind of reestablish the competitive baseline with some sort of net new research. And we still do a little bit of that, but now we're starting much further up the learning curve in whatever it is we're looking at. So it's very easy to go and pull all of the recent announcements based on a specific competitor set or from a specific geography or product area, or even kind of categorize things based on whether it was a partnership or an acquisition announcement. It just makes it a lot quicker for us to kind of triage what's useful to know, and make sure that we're getting to the kind of net new thinking in whatever strategy projects we're running that much faster, right? Several days faster than maybe we would have otherwise. So that's been a huge benefit for us. I also already mentioned the dialogue that we have with product leaders and business leaders across the bank, I think has definitely improved as a result of having this distribution and having a natural excuse to have strategic conversations. So whereas in the past, I might be reading a news article that was relevant to the industry and think to kind of send that around to an executive group and sort of elicit a conversation, the number of touch points and opportunities that we have for that kind of dialogue is just significantly higher now. And so as a result, we have many more of those threads, many more of those calls that I was talking about earlier on strategy topics. And it's good for us because that gives us more input from people outside of strategy on these trends that are shaping our business. And I think it's good for the bank because it gives us an opportunity to share an opinion from strategy in a dialogue that maybe we wouldn't have been exposed to otherwise. So maybe somebody else would have sent that same article around, but it wouldn't have been on our distribution. It would have just been a direct conversation between two members of the executive committee or somebody in product and then somebody in the front line, somebody in our market-facing teams. And so because we're kind of establishing ourselves in that nexus, sort of at the crossroads of that flow of information, it just makes it a lot easier for strategy to participate in competitive dialogue at the bank. So I think those are the big ones that I would highlight. Just the frequency, the quality of interactions around these themes is significantly improved, I think, as a result of having all of these artifacts floating around that we're a part of.
Totally get your point, Brendan. So basically, the team the SVB team can now focus more on a higher value add things, which mainly can be analysis of the same information. And as you rightly mentioned, it saves time. It makes it more efficient, and it's great to know from the end user itself. Now, as a critical part of one of the largest banks in the US, and now I take a pause with this. You've been there, done that. You've stayed in the sector for so long, right from your journey in McKinsey to SVB. How important do you think it is to keep a track of market and competitive intelligence for all financial organizations like yours?
Oh, it's critical. I mean, I think we think about it a lot, specifically because the sector that we operate in, the innovation economy, is maybe even faster moving than a lot of other areas of finance. So, I mentioned before how many of the institutions in our competitive set are themselves venture-backed fintech or other companies, or their debt funds or other institutions that by their nature are fast moving, they're innovative, they're constantly making new announcements, new partnerships, expanding, et cetera. And so I think just keeping up with the pace of that is difficult, and it's critical, because if we don't, then the consequence is that our strategy, our product development, it sort of plays on a more of a legacy timescale for financial institutions, and that doesn't work anymore. And so, we feel that acutely because we're really close to a lot of that venture-backed activity. But I think that's true of the entire financial services industry these days, honestly. Look at how much attention JP Morgan pays to fintech developments, the time that they spend, looking at those announcements. You hear Jamie Dimon commenting on it publicly in CNBC interviews. They're making partnerships, they're acquiring companies, even at these crazy valuations of the last couple of years. And I think it's all a sign that, everybody, not just innovation-focused banks like ours, are paying a lot of attention to the faster moving parts of this industry. And that just sort of raises the stakes for being able to understand what's going on and, casting a wide enough net and being thorough enough in how you're managing competitive intelligence and market intelligence to actually feel like you have a finger on the pulse of what's happening. It's not as easy as I feel like it was when I started at McKinsey, where you read a couple of newsletters provided by third parties, you go to a couple of industry events, you feel like you kind of know everything that's happening. And I think if you did that today, you'd be missing something. So that's the challenge.
Makes all the sense. I'm sure the viewers find it useful. Knowing we spent a long time together in this engagement, Brendan, am I missing something? Is there anything else you would like to add from your experience, or any word of advice for our viewers?
No, honestly, I think the only thing I would leave you with is maybe picking up on the comment I made earlier about customization, which is just that the thing that I've appreciated most about working with Contify is that, you treat it like a partnership, right? I don't feel like I'm, buying a solution off the shelf and the software either works or it doesn't. For one thing, you have kind of the hybrid model of the analysts and the software solution and the AI, ML powered algorithms and all of that. And so the combination, I think, makes the product more valuable, even just from a starting position. But then I think the responsiveness of the team and having, account managers like yourself who are always available to answer questions or make little tweaks or just, hear us out on the things that matter to us so that the work product gets better and better tailored to our use case. That's really the best part of this relationship, in my opinion. So I want to thank you again for that. And, that's the reason why, we really enjoyed working with you over the last couple of years.
Absolutely, Brendan. In that endeavor, as I mentioned earlier, we have introduced an insights team, then that's definitely going to help us add more crisp insights to our quarterly reports, etc. And like always, it's been great talking to you. Thank you so much for your time and experiences you've shared with us today. I hope those viewing this video will find them insightful, and that your experience helps them make informed decisions about their own market and competitive intelligence journey. So wish you a great day ahead, Brendan. Thanks for joining us, and I'm sure we'll keep in touch.
Happy to do it. Thanks again, Naveen.
Thanks, Brendan.